Motion properly made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Since we've got a pretty packed conversation list here today, I'm going to go ahead and jump right off into some of this very quickly. Julie's handed all of you a hard copy of a resolution draft that you received via email, and it was also posted in board docs earlier related to a resolution that we would like to present to the board this evening if we could, connected to a joint resolution that's being currently discussed in the South Carolina House and Senate related to retroactively putting in place the teacher step raises that were zeroed out of this current year's operating budget previously. We wanted to go ahead and get on the record with this one because it is running rather quickly through the General Assembly because they want to be able to budget this money accordingly in current budget and also discuss for the next budget where it's applicable. So I'm going to ask Julie if she can fill us in on anything that's come up since this came out. What's the latest on this?
The latest on this is that it passed 19-0 last week with the Ways and Means Committee. So the next step, it will have to go to the House floor. Don't know if that will happen this week.
Okay, and then once it passes the House, goes to Senate naturally. But right now, the conversations we're having in the House and the Senate indicates that this is going to be a pretty fast moving piece of legislation. And we felt it was appropriate, considering everything that our teachers have been through, that we should be one of the first groups to publicly come out in support of this resolution. So you have it in front of you. Are there any questions? Are there members of the board that are not members of the committee would like to ask a question? Mr. Lewis.
Does the resolution that passed does the action that passed have this in here about recognizing the hardship of district employees and increasing pay, or is it just about restoring the step increase? Why does this resolution support something different than what's working its way through the House?
When we put the draft together originally, we wanted to also make sure that we set a clear statement that the teachers would know that we still recognize the work that they're doing on a daily basis.
I'm asking because this includes all other district employees, and I'm just what is working its way through the House is about a step increase. This specifically talks about pay raises. Are we supporting? Are we asking them to add that to the bill that's working its way?
Not to my knowledge, but also understand that from past practice, we have, when we provided step increases and cost of living increases, it was also for all staff members as well, clerical facilities and so forth. So we wanted to go ahead and put language in there that our community would also understand, and our legislative delegation would understand that this is the potential that the board could do this in the future. This is still a decision we would have to make in the future on how we choose to deal with it.
So we're advocating with our legislative delegation to include this information in what's going through the House right now.
The intent for this is to simply share with our delegation in Greenville that we support their move to do the step increase.
Okay.
Is there a problem?
No, I'm just interested that we would include this here, like it's our position, but aren't advocating that the General Assembly actually take steps to change what's working its way through the House to mirror this. Because my understanding is they're only talking about a step increase.
That is my understanding also. Julie, would you like to speak to this since you put most of it together?
We can still advocate for it. There's time. It's not on the House floor yet. So we can still talk to our delegation about it.
It would be the administration's recommendation, if I might speak to
Please.
that, Mr. Sowers. It would be the administration's recommendation that that be included in there. This board and this administration has traditionally always recommended salary increases for non-teachers that is at least somewhat comparable to that of teachers who get a step increase. The other thing that's not in there, as best I understand their resolution is to give a step. We have a number of teachers who are no longer entitled to a step. So the resolution in the General Assembly, or the action that they are considering, would only recognize those teachers who are entitled to a step. I would believe the amount that would be set aside for that purpose might only be that sufficient for the steps on the state schedule. It's unclear. The amount that's mentioned, if I remember correctly, Ms. Horton, is total at state $50 million. Sometimes you can use, as a rule of thumb, we get about 10% of that amount. Sometimes you can use that as a rule of thumb. That would be $5 million. I believe we calculated the cost of this raise for our teachers getting a step would be $6.1 million. If you tried to match those of our teachers who would not get a step with an amount equivalent to a step, which is rounded to be about 2%, that adds, I believe, another $600,000. I don't know if Robin's in here or not. And then if you add our other employees, that comes to right at 3.9 million more dollars. In regular budget years, the state will partially, generally speaking, partially fund the teacher salary increase. They will also usually add some funding either through EFA or perhaps through EIA salary supplement or benefit support to help offset the raises for others. There's only been 1 year in recent history when they appropriated enough money to fully fund a teacher raise. So certainly we would encourage them to consider and look at the efforts of all employees, as this body and this district has traditionally done. I don't know if that speaks to sufficiently to the question or not, but that would certainly be our recommendation.
Is that helpful, Mr. Lewis?
I understand what we're saying, but I guess what is confusing to me is the General Assembly is moving forward a plan to fix a problem they had last year, which was to restore a step increase that the House approved and didn't move forward. And that had nothing to do with additional hardships and responsibility during the school year. I mean, that was something that was approved, and then there just wasn't money for it. And now they believe they have the money for it, and they're trying to fix a problem. So it seems like we're trying to fit into it something that isn't in their plan. And then it concerns me that we have a resolution that then they don't fund. Are we taking a position that it would be our expectation that all employees would receive this increase funded with local funds if it is funded by the General Assembly and this part's not? Because I don't know that we have recurring dollars to do this in February. If it passes the General Assembly and we only give step increases to teachers, and then we have got to come back and get another, what do you say, 2.9 million that we would need to fund the rest of it?
I'm sorry, Mr. Lewis, did you say 3.9?
I thought that's what I heard you say.
Yes, that's correct. Be 600,000 for the teachers not included in that step raise,
Right.
and 3.9 beyond that for other employees.
And would it not also be prudent, for the lack of a better phrase, for us to include other issues connected to this while we've got their attention? So in other words, if we passed a resolution that was solely targeted and focused on their existing resolution, which could change, would it not be a better long-term strategy to put other issues that we're concerned about into the same resolution, highlighting those issues, and in turn, maybe giving them an opportunity to change their resolution? That's always a possibility. This follows, as best I can recall, similar verbiage for resolutions of such manner. And so when I asked Julie to take it upon herself to put this together, they followed past information. Any other questions? Pat?
Am I correct when I say the total cost of this is $10 million?
Or can you speak to that?
Let me pull that back up just to make sure I don't give you an incorrect number. The total cost of the teachers is 6.1. And if you add the teachers that aren't included, that makes it 6.7. And then you add 3.82, that would take it to 10.52. Total.
The total
If you
for-
did that for all, if you did the step increases on our schedule and the teachers that aren't on the schedule, which I think we start at 0 and go to 32, if I recall correctly. So anybody with 33, above 33 years would get no increase without the additional 600,000. And the non-teaching personnel would be 3.82. And if you use the general rule of thumb for when we kind of estimate what state appropriations mean to Greenville County schools, you can generally say 10%. The set aside here at the General Assembly is $50 million. So we might expect 5. So that would be right at half the total amount.
So we're trying to give the teachers a step increase. And those that are beyond the step increase, we're trying to give them a raise as well.
Yes, sir. Equal to the average step, which is like 1.86. We normally round that off to 2%. And in this case, we rounded that to 2%.
This is all involved teachers. Doesn't involve non-teachers at all.
Non-teachers would be the $3.82 million. And so it's our recommendation. Obviously, it's the action of the board to determine what you all want to resolve. But it's our recommendation that all employees be included in pay raise. Just as we, and I believe this board has advocated for in years past to the General Assembly.
So 6.1 million is going to go for those that want a step increase.
Yes, sir.
And then we're going to put another 3.9 million for those who've already gone beyond the step increase, but we want to give them a raise as well.
Well, that's almost correct. 600,000 for teachers that wouldn't get a step, to give them the equivalent of a step, and right at 3.82 million for non-teaching employees. And the request here, the resolution, I believe, reads that you would be asking the General Assembly to consider all employees, not simply those who teach, and not simply those who teach that are still entitled to a step increase. The state steps stop at 23, I believe.
How much is the state willing to fund?
Sir?
How much is the state willing to fund?
We believe that based on estimating 10% of the total appropriation they're seeking for this, it would be about $5 million. That's really just an estimate. We cannot know that for certain at this point.
So we got to come up with $5 million.
If the administration were to recommend to the board and the board were to act on that recommendation to do this absent state funding, yes, sir.
Where would this $5 million come from on our end?
It would have to come from a combination of state and local funds. You'd have to give consideration to how much do you think your tax base might increase in subsequent years? How much would you perhaps be willing to allocate from fund balance? Being very cautious that you have to be very careful about digging a long-term hole that you can't fill with ongoing revenue by using non-recurring revenue.
I'm trying to ascertain how big of a problem would it be for us to come up with 5 million. Now, we usually say we're going to take it out of a fund balance, but I don't know where we stand on our fund balance.
The problem would not be identifying $5 million. The problem would be, is the long-term impact of funding that $5 million over subsequent years going to create a hardship in subsequent years? And $5 million right now, when you look at your fund balance and you look at the amount that that COVID CARES Act 2 is going to generate to the district, $5 million isn't the issue. The issue truly would be the long-term impact of a recurring funding of the $5 million, somewhere about 3-4 years out, maybe 3 years out.
Is this for 1 year only, Dr. Oyster?
No, sir. Once you put a teacher salary increase in effect, absent the circumstances that allow you to furlough employees, and you are, in general terms, required to continue that from that day forward. You cannot go backwards on a teacher salary unless the furlough provisions kick in.
From now on, we would be funding those that were off the step increase.
Yes, sir.
And would that be about the same amount each year? I think you said 3.9 million.
And it would be compounded as you do other things with it, but you're going to have some more teachers move into that category, some move out. The amount over time is not going to increase appreciably.
Does a resolution take all 3 of these into account?
The resolution as currently written is asking, as I understand it, for the General Assembly to consider all 3 of these groups, not just the teachers who are entitled to a step increase. Now, Mr. Sailors should, I guess, more appropriately speak to that or answer that. That's my understanding.
You're correct.
So the last paragraph on the resolution,
Yes, sir.
saying that, exactly what is it saying? Reinstatements.
Would you like to speak to that?
What it's saying is that we are supportive of the reinstatement of the step increases for teachers, but we are also very interested in supporting other employees that are not teachers and those teachers beyond the step structure to receive something comparable in increases.
My concern is funding teachers down the road for those that are not on a step increase, but now they're going to be on an increase. So we're doing away with the levels of increase, right? If we were to prove this, then we're doing away with step increase. We are adding step increases for those that are beyond the step increases that we presently have. Is that 31?
We're not adding to them. We're only going to fund the ones that the state does not fund. In other words, if this resolution passes in its current verbiage, our step increase is up to 23. Am I correct? Am I right? The state funds.
Ours is beyond.
But the state funds to what level?
To 23, yes.
Okay, the state pays.
There's
0 to
33 steps,
23.
it goes to 32. It starts
And then
at
so
0.
from above 23, we have to pay for it. That's what we would need to find if the state funds the step increases only. As Dr. Royster said, this recommendation of a resolution also asks for consideration, not only for supporting the reinstatement of the step increase, but also funding everyone at that same increase.
That's really the intent, as I read it, of the third paragraph of your proposed resolution. And that is advocating to the General Assembly to fully fund the actual cost incurred under each district's teacher salary schedule. That'd be, for us, roughly estimated to be the difference between 5 million and 6.1 million. Then you talk about the ones that aren't on the salary schedule, are on the step, that's another 600,000.
You see a problem, Dr. Royster, with us having to come up with $5 million.
Sorry, I didn't understand the first part of that, Coach.
Do you agree that we will come up with $5 million? It won't be a problem for us.
It's not a problem to come up with the $5 million. The question would be, and we've not had time to fully vet that question. The question would be, can you sustain that over a period of time until such time as your revenues, either through some moderate tax increase or through growth in the mill value, would pick up the $5 million? Coming up with $5 million right now is really just not, that's not the big issue. The big issue is replacing that $5 million down the road with recurring revenue.
And if we do this, we have got to continue to do it. It can't be for just one school year.
Yes, sir. Now, again, as I understand it, this resolution is asking the state to do it. It doesn't bind you to do anything. But it does reflect the past practices of the district.
So this draft, Mr. Sailors is saying that we want the state to fully fund this.
That would be the request, yes.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Any other questions? Lisa?
So we've normally, the state funds the step increase and other salary increases comes out of base student costs and local funds, right?
Yeah, sometimes some EIA benefit money. But yes, that's generally correct.
I guess I feel like, I mean, do we really think that this is something that seems viable and reasonable to ask them to do? Because that's not something they've ever funded. It's not something that, I don't know that we've ever talked to them about providing a special pot of funds for our employee increases.
You're correct in that regard, and I believe I'm correct in saying that we have asked for it in the past and they have not always followed through with meeting all of our requests. Again, I go back to the philosophy, the mindset, if you will, that although they're looking right now at a revenue amount to us that is this big. Why can't we ask for more? Let's ask for everything. We may not get it, but we might get it. We don't know.
So, but give me a little clarity. To Burke's point, if they approve the step increases, if they give us that money, now they're talking about giving it as a lump sum payment, which does or doesn't obligate them to keep that level of funding into subsequent years.
I would think that it does, because what they're doing is essentially they're giving it to us in a lump sum because they're making it retroactively active, appropriate, and enacted, if you will. So what they're doing is they're giving you all the money in one lump sum to replace the fact that we have not been receiving it through normal funding channels. Am I correct, Robin? Okay.
Yeah, so it seems like with the other stuff we've got in there, it just kind of, it muddies the waters for me thinking about it a little bit, because that's not, we've never had them give us a lump sum or give us any specific pot of money to pay for those things. And we have advocated for additional teacher step increases for them to add to their schedule to mirror ours, but not we haven't ever specifically said that we wanted the legislature to fund pay increases. We've always made that
And
decision on our own.
I
right?
understand where you're coming from on that, but I can't speak for myself. In my 18 years, I've never known them to go back and retroactively give us an increase from where they cut it out of that budget year. This is the first time, to my knowledge, that they've come back and said, well, you know, we did find some more money. So what we told you in October you couldn't have, we're going to tell you in January you can have.
They couldn't, so if they do that, again, you said they're on the hook, which is good. I mean, they're kind of
Yeah.
on the hook for our teacher steps, but how would we ensure that they would be on the hook for the other funding?
They're not
piece?
on the hook for the other funding unless they make themselves on the hook. What we're doing is asking them to consider, for the lack of a better phrase, putting themselves on the hook. If that makes sense.
I think it might also be possible that they may have looked at the amount of revenue they have. They might see that they could do a salary increase one time. But if you do it this year, you get 2 years benefit out of it. And that's just speculation on my part.
Okay, so I guess, reading this resolution, and it's gonna come from committee and the board's gonna approve it. It says, last paragraph, the trustees will work with our state legislators and administration to financially reward employees through either reinstatement of suspended teacher step increases or pay increases, or pay raises for the school year. That seems to me that it is saying beyond something we're asking legislators to do. It seems to me we're sort of taking an action that the board is going to do this.
Well, if the legislature only gives us the lump sum of step increases that they did not fund earlier this year, and that takes us from 0 to 23, would the next logical step for this board would be to, at minimum, fund the balance of the step increases from 24 to 35?
Yeah, but it just seems like that's not an advocacy question. That's a budget and funding and
Well,
financial
then
question.
when it comes to the full board, if you'd like to strike that, you're welcome to do so. Any other questions? Michelle, then Roger.
Kirk, all other employees, increases are funded how?
In years past, through a combination of state and local revenue, and it just depends on the year as to what amount would come from what source. And almost every year there's an increase to EFA, some years more than others. The I believe it was a fiscal year 17, we recommended the board approved 5% increase for non-teacher pay, which was probably the largest increase in a number of years. In that particular year, we got a greater amount of state funding than we ordinarily would have gotten. And we had some local funding, and part of that state funding change, if I remember correctly, had to do with reclassification of the way they count, EFA counts special ed students. All right, Raman? So it kind of depends on the year, but generally speaking, that falls locally to fund predominantly. However, I believe that I can recall just in the last 8 or 10 years, but well beyond that, this board advocating for additional funding from the state to allow for things such as to meet the needs for inflation and pay raises. And really, when you look at the way we traditionally are funded, again, 2 years ago was really an exception, but traditionally are funded, It is usually barely enough to fund the required teacher pay based on the state salary schedule, not on our salary schedule. It is almost never enough to fully fund teacher raises for Greenville County schools.
So we
And
are
it
basi-
certainly isn't enough to fund other raises.
so we are basically asking the state if they are gonna fund 2% for teachers to fund 2% across the board.
Or to fund some amount. Now, that's my understanding of it. I don't read it as asking a specific amount, but to
for them
consider
to
the funding
fund
for teachers who are off the step and for other employees that are not teachers.
So what's wrong with asking for the pie in the sky from the state? They've never fully funded this base student cost. So I think it's a good thing to ask them for a whole lot, and then they give us some of it. So that's all.
Philosophy. What's the worst they're gonna tell you is no?
I think that
That's
certainly,
right.
obviously, we would recommend to you all. Now, I do understand in having read through this and thought about it, you all might want to look at that last paragraph because it might be a little problematic in committing to do something that perhaps may or may not occur. So you might give some consideration, just as a recommendation, you might give some consideration to the wording of the final paragraph.
That it, Michelle? Roger?
Along those same lines, the resolution in the first paragraph says the General Assembly is currently considering. The second paragraph says South Carolina House has committed to an appropriation of 50 million. So I'm confused on that. So enlighten me a little bit on, are they committed or are
Well,
they still thinking about it?
The House has introduced a joint resolution, which would be the entire General Assembly looking at it, but the House itself is committing within the bill to 50 million.
Has the House already voted on it?
The House Ways and Means has voted unanimously on it. It has not gone to the House floor.
Okay. And did I read somewhere that the state has an extra $200 million that they're putting in back into the budget? Did I read that somewhere? Or I just thinking that I read it?
I don't know that they have that recurring.
I think that, as I recall, the last time I saw a number, it was that number, but I don't know if that number is still a valid number.
200,000? I mean,
200
200 million.
million.
Yes, sir.
Do we know if the state are receiving a comparable amount of income that they have received in previous years? Do we know that yet?
We don't know that yet.
Do we know if the state, I mean, our county, our district, are we receiving as much as we did in prior years, or is it lower or more or whatever at this point in time?
Right now, with the exception of this month, it is tracked right on projection. We track it, finance tracks it. I don't know that daily is an exaggeration, certainly weekly, but almost daily. We do know that this month they are behind in collections of local tax revenue, and we know that they are far behind in posting collections. So we believe at this point, I think based on what Robin and her staff have found out, that the fact they're behind is because they haven't posted collections that were received by the deadline, which was January the 15th. Is that right, Robin? And I think what happened right after January the 15th, that Monday was a federal holiday. And I think they are also plagued with a large number of their staff not being in either because they're quarantined or isolated. Is that correct?
So So our projection, if we're online with thinking what the projection, was our projection more than last year or less?
More than last year, online with what we projected for this year, and realizing we're going to get some reduction in EFA because we got that, whatever it is, 2,400 fewer students, which we've accounted for in the budget so far. Other than this glitch about the collections in January, which is the prime collection time, we're right where we forecast to be based on the report that we gave you all. Gosh, it's been to me now, the last meeting, we talked about the bonus amount. So that has not changed other than this, what I just said to you about them being behind in posting collections.
Could you remind me again how much the millage, how much millage we have in reserve or have not used the millage?
Do you have that with
I don't
you?
know if I'm saying that right,
To do it from memory.
I can't either. But was it 5 or 6 meals or something?
Sounds.
Maybe 10. I don't remember. Okay.
I believe it because we don't have the new posting yet for this year, so it would be in last year's budget book. Like, I can probably tell you pretty quickly.
He's gonna go find the book.
Yeah, I guess I'm gonna find out. I think I agree with Burke, what Burke is saying, that last paragraph gives me a little
Well, I've
indigestion.
got an idea.
Okay,
I made an adjustment and see what you think about it.
go ahead.
Okay. I took the liberty of striking a few things in the last paragraph. Therefore, be it resolved that the Greenville County Schools Board of Trustees recognizes all employees' extraordinary efforts and will work with our state legislators to financially reward employees through reinstatement of suspended teacher step increases, period. I'll read it one more time.
Okay,
Therefore, be it resolved that the Greenville County Schools Board of Trustees recognizes all employees' extraordinary efforts and will work with our state legislators to financially reward employees through reinstatement of suspended teacher step increases.
so you're leaving out the administration, is that what you're doing?
Yeah,
So just saying that we will work with legislators.
the resolution is coming from the board anyway, so striking administration is not going to be a deal breaker in either direction.
So it's not committing the
What
board.
we're focusing on in the last one is the reinstatement of step increases.
Okay.
Then once those are reinstated, the board takes action accordingly in the future.
I guess that does that. I sort of have to see it in writing to digest it a little bit. But,
Did you get this? Did you? Does your notes reflect?
Like yours, except for I use the word request instead of will work with, that we will request or implore our state legislators to provide that.
either one, I guess, would work.
Okay.
Whatever y'all agree on.
Does anybody on the committee have any questions about that adjustment?
Taylor,
Yes, sir.
what about the very last one, pay raises for the school year 2020-21?
I struck that. Yes, sir. The end of the sentence would end with teacher step increases, period. Is the committee okay with the resolution as amended? Carolyn? Roger?
I like what Lisa says about we'll request, not including our state, request our state legislators working with them.
So Lisa, say what you had in yours.
She use or lose in that number.
and request our state legislators financially reward employees through either reinstatement of suspended,
Okay.
through reinstatement of suspended.
So you struck will work with and put request.
Request.
Okay. Michelle, you okay with all this? Glenda? Okay, sorry. All right, then I'll entertain a motion that we accept the resolution as amended. Is there, sir?
Does Dr.
Oh,
Roster have an
Bert,
answer?
you want to finish answering Roger's question?
Yes, sir, if it's all right now.
Please.
9.8 mills,
Almost 10 minutes.
which would not include any allowable millage for this year, which we've not yet been. We'll get that notification probably sometime in March. So there will be an amount added to that 9.8 mills. I don't have the use or lose out of that. There may be very well be some use or lose values about, Robin, I'm out of here, about 1.3,
So
1.4.
So if we had to, the board could increase the millage to cover this. And it would not put us in dire straits, I guess, for future years if we use that. Okay, I'm ready to vote. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Michelle, you're okay as well. Okay. Then there's a motion on the floor. Who made the motion to accept it? Okay, Pat seconded. Who made it? Okay, Michelle made. Y'all want to arm wrestle for it? Okay, we'll let ladies go first. Michelle made the motion and Pat seconded to accept the resolution draft as amended. Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries, and this will be amended and sent to the board for consideration tonight. Julie, I'll give you this. We can add it on board docs. Okay, we've got about 15 minutes before the next meeting. So as I mentioned previously in a report to the board from the committee, in a conversation I had over the holidays with Chairwoman Allison, she said that it was her intentions, along with that of the speaker, to, instead of putting the education reform package back on the floor of the legislature, they were going to be dropping individual packages respective to each piece of that massive legislation from last session. And if you've been following this, they followed through on their words. There are literally hundreds of education and ways and means related bills that are connected to some form of education reform. So one of greater interest right now, understanding that some of these are going to die a quick death in subcommittee, but some of them also have got some concern. And one I've got listed tonight is related to testing. I think Mr. Lewis also mentioned that as well in an email to me about what our position would be on that. So I've asked Julie if she could give us a brief update on where this particular legislation stands, which I believe it is 3618.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. If you could fill us in on 3618 and then anything else that's going on. So I'm actually asking you to report on 2.02 and 2.03 cumulatively.
Okay. H3618, it is a joint resolution that was sponsored by Speaker Lucas, and it is directing the South Carolina Department of Education to administer summative assessments that are required under the Education Accountability Act, and would also require the publication of report cards and yet waiving school performance ratings. There's been a lot of pushback from Molly Spearman, from SCASA, from the School Boards Association, and Palmetto State Teachers Group, and others, that we don't really need to do this because Ms. Spearman is already seeking a federal waiver on these. And so there was a subcommittee last week that had this particular bill at the end of the agenda. They ran out of time. They did not get to it. Ms. Spearman did give some sort of presentation at the beginning saying that we are doing formative assessments along the way so that teachers know what they need to concentrate on with students, so that this was not necessary at this time. So she gave that presentation. Now, Currently, the same education subcommittee, House Education Subcommittee, is meeting right now, and this is not on the agenda for today. So I don't know if they will try to put it on at another point, or if they want to wait to see what the feds will say as far as a waiver. So right now it's out there, but it was not voted on by the subcommittee, and it did not appear on the agenda for that subcommittee meeting today.
So you're saying essentially that they're going to hold their cards close to their vest until the feds make a decision?
I'm not saying that, you're saying that, but it could be.
The assumption's got a little bit of validity to it. Okay. Are there any questions about that particular piece? So we'll keep a close eye on that, and we may need to engage each of you individually in that one as it moves forward. Julie, what about the other items that we've been keeping an eye on?
Well, there were 900 bills pre-filed in December. About 9 pages of those 900 were education-related bills. But the ones that have some sort of movement are the ones that are being pushed by Speaker Lucas and Chairman Allison. And again, they are repeats of a lot of the language that we saw in the big education reform bill that we've heard so much about over the past 2 years. Ones that are being considered right now, allowing districts to designate certain schools as schools of innovation, with the caveat that a district cannot designate all schools as schools of innovation like Pickens County did last year.
Yes.
Right. And so there has been some concern expressed about privatization and allowing private companies to come in. So that one carried over from last week to this week. That's being discussed right now. And it is also on the full committee agenda for tomorrow. Another one that passed last week in subcommittee was a South Carolina Computer Science Education Initiative Act. Again, this was co-sponsored by Lucas and Allison. And what that is the expansion, the enhancement of computer science education in high schools through a statewide computer science education plan that would be put together by the State Department of Education. That will probably be passed by the full committee tomorrow. And then another one they're looking at today, and then it's on the full committee calendar for tomorrow. It's revisions to Read to Succeed, also literacy and numeracy screening assessments. And there are a lot of parts to that. Some of the parts include Department of Education approving 5 reliable early literacy and numeracy assessments, creating a South Carolina reading panel, revising some of the required coursework for literacy add-on endorsements, mandatory 3rd grade retention for those that cannot read, removes the requirement that there are reading and literacy coaches in all schools and instead concentrates on the schools where there is a valid need. That is in subcommittee, as I said, and it will probably be passed by full committee tomorrow. And then in Ways and Means, you've got the joint resolution as far as the teacher step increases. And then also, Chairman Allison did introduce a piece of legislation about allowing retirees to be able to return to work, where they may return to work regardless of what level of earnings they have, as long as they are retired for 12 months. So I don't know where that stands at this point with Ways and Means, but that's another one that's been referred to Ways and Means. Right now, that's.
Okay. Does anybody on the committee have a question? Michelle?
Right now, with the break-in service, how long is it? Is it not 12 months now? The break-in service for the retirees.
I don't know that the break-in service is the issue. It's the level of earnings. And what this does is remove anything related to earnings. But they put in that you have to have the break for 12 months in order to be eligible.
So they do have to have the break for 12 months in order to be eligible to make any amount, not just that cap.
That's what that particular bill says, yes.
Okay. Is there, Bert, is there, break-in service now?
Yeah, but it's,
Is it like 90 days?
yeah, it's 45 or 90 days.
I just said it wasn't 12 months. I'm wondering why they went to 12 months.
Well, because they pulled, this proposal pulls the cap off. Now there's a break-in service. You can come back if it's a critical needs area with no salary cap, correct? But you still have to have a break-in service of that 45 or 90 days. So if it's critical needs, cap doesn't apply. If you are in a position, an elected position, for example, coroner or sheriff or constitutional officer, the cap doesn't apply. And if you are over 62 years of age, the cap does not apply, but that also requires a break-in service of either the 45 or 90 days, whichever it is.
And this has come to the fore a lot during the pandemic and dealing with trying to find employees to help with DHEC, teachers, just all across the board.
Right now, almost every teacher that we'd want to employ, we can get them qualified under critical needs and the cap doesn't apply. There's not really non-teaching personnel that would be more affected.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Lisa?
Ask about, it's more related to the SCSBA, that legislative alert about the takeover, school board takeover.
Correct.
Did we reach out and to any of our senators and express any concern? I mean, I know it doesn't, we don't think it would ever apply to our district, but given that it's a SCSBA position we've adopted, are we advocating?
I mean, I'm assuming everyone in the room that's on the board received both an email and a voice message from the School Board Association office asking us to reach out to members of the Senate Education Committee, of which 4 are from our delegation: Rex, Scott, Ross, and Dwight. I reached out to the 4 of them and asked them to take that position into consideration, that the control stays local, as we all agree that this is not one of those where the state legislature or the State Department of Education needs to take over an elected body from the community and remove them from the position. So I have no idea how it was received, but the message was conveyed. And if any of you did, I'm sure that it was appreciated. They did not take any action today. This was just tomorrow, 10 o'clock tomorrow. So if you would like to send an email, in the body of the email that we did receive from the School Board Association, there are the members of the committee along with their email addresses. And if you'd like to send them a note, that would be greatly appreciated. Just to bring everybody up to speed, whenever the State Department puts a school district in a state of emergency, which are generally the small rural areas who have had major struggles with educational instruction, financial management, and so forth, the State Department of Education has requested that the state take over and, for all practical purposes, remove the board of trustees that was elected in that community. Naturally, our state association is against that. And so that's the position in the background on this question. Anything else?
Before you adjourn, Mr.
Yes,
Summers, I need to correct the number we gave Mr. Meek.
Yes, sir.
That number is actually 15 mills, because we need to go back and add the additional mills that were allowed last year but not levied. And there would be a 4.1 lose or use.
Use it or lose it.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Said it backwards, didn't I? Yes, sir. That's correct.
Okay. Well, if there's no other questions I'm sorry, go ahead.
Who introduced the bill that you were talking about just now? Who introduced the bill?
You're talking about the one on,
School board members.
it's my understanding it was Senator Hembry, who was chairman of the Senate Education Committee,
So it came
at the
out
request of the State Department of Education.
at the request of, okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. Unless there's something else to come before this committee, I will adjourn the committee meeting at 4:55 p.m. Thank you very much for coming in early and participating in this conversation.